It was raining hard when I checked into the hotel. I had been driving for hours, and the storm made it impossible to keep going. I pulled into the parking lot, grabbed my bag, and ran inside. The lobby was warm and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The clerk behind the desk gave me a strange look when I gave him my name. "Mark Andrews?" he asked, typing on his computer. "Are you sure?" "Yes, why?" I said, confused. "It looks like you're already checked in," he replied, furrowing his brow. "Room 214. I felt a chill run down my spine. "There must be a mistake," I said. "I just got here." He looked at me for a moment before nodding. "Let me sort this out," he said, picking up the phone. After a few minutes of hushed conversation, he hung up and turned back to me. "I'm sorry about the confusion. We'll get you a different room." He handed me a key card for room 315. I thanked him and headed for the elevator, my mind racing. Someone else was using my name. I needed to figure out what was going on. The room was basic but clean. I dropped my bag on the bed and took out my phone. I called the hotel's main number and asked to be connected to room 214. It rang a few times before someone picked up. "Hello," a voice said, sounding exactly like mine. My heart pounded in my chest. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause. "This is Mark Andrews." "Who are you?" I hung up, my hand shaking. Whoever it was, they sounded just like me. I knew I had to get to the bottom of this. I went back to the lobby and asked the clerk for a favor. "Can you tell me if the person in room 214 left any information?" I asked. "I think there's been some kind of mistake." He hesitated but eventually nodded. "I'll check," he said, typing again. "It looks like they used a different ID but gave your name and credit card." I felt sick. Someone was pretending to be me, and they were right here in the same hotel. "Do you have security cameras?" I asked. "I need to see who this is." He called the manager, and after explaining the situation, they agreed to show me the footage. We went into a small office, and the manager pulled up the recordings from earlier that evening. "There," I said, pointing to the screen. A man walked into the lobby, drenched from the rain, and approached the desk. I could only see the back of his head, but he handed over an ID and a credit card. "Can you zoom in on the ID?" I asked. The manager did, but the image was too blurry to read. "We can call the police," the manager suggested. "This is identity theft." I nodded, my stomach in knots. "Please do," I said. While we waited for the police, I went back to my room. I didn't feel safe knowing this person was just a few doors down. I double-checked the locks and sat on the bed, my mind racing. About an hour later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find 2 officers standing there. I explained the situation again, and they agreed to go to room 214 to question the imposter. I waited in the hallway as they knocked on the door. There was no answer at first, but then the door creaked open. I couldn't hear what was being said, but after a few minutes, the officers stepped back, and the man stepped out. I gasped. He looked exactly like me. Same height, same build, even the same clothes. He glanced at me, his eyes cold and calculating. "Mark Andrews?" one of the officers asked him. "Yes," he replied, his voice eerily calm. "You're under arrest for identity theft," the officer said, pulling out handcuffs. The man didn't resist. He kept his eyes on me as they led him away, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low. I shivered, watching him disappear down the hallway. The police took my statement and assured me they would investigate further. The hotel manager apologized profusely and offered me a free stay, but I declined. I just wanted to get out of there. I checked out the next morning, still shaken. I arrived back at my hotel room late that night, drenched from the rain. It had been a long day of meetings and I was looking forward to a hot shower and some sleep. The hallway was quiet as I made my way to room 304. I swiped my keycard, opened the door, and stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the faint sound of someone moving inside. My heart skipped a beat. I flipped on the light and saw a man standing by my suitcase, rummaging through my belongings. He looked up, startled. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The man straightened up, holding a pair of my socks. I think there's been a mistake," he stammered. "They gave me this room. I was just checking in." My mind raced. How could someone else have access to my room? "Let me see your key card," I said, trying to sound assertive. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a card. It looked just like mine. "See? Room 304, he said, showing it to me. I took a step closer, feeling uneasy. Something was off. "Why are you going through my stuff then?" I asked, eyeing my scattered clothes and personal items. He hesitated, then gave a nervous laugh. "I was just looking for some dry clothes. I'm soaked." His excuse didn't make sense, but I didn't want to confront him directly. "Get out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll sort this out at the front desk." He didn't move. Instead, he looked at me with a strange intensity. "You know, you're right. This is your room," he said slowly. "But it's raining hard outside. Maybe you could help me out." My stomach churned. "Help you out? With what?" I asked, inching toward the door. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just let me stay here tonight. I'll be gone by morning." I shook my head. "No, you need to leave now." His smile faded. "I don't think you understand," he said, his tone shifting. "I'm not asking." Fear gripped me as he took a step closer. I glanced at the door, calculating my chances of making a run for it. "Please, just go," I said, my voice shaking. He lunged at me, grabbing my wrist. I struggled, trying to pull away, but he was strong. "You're not going anywhere," he growled, pushing me toward the bed. I fought back, kicking and clawing at him. "Help! Somebody help!" I screamed, hoping someone in the hallway might hear me. He covered my mouth with his hand, muffling my cries. "Shut up," he hissed. "No one's coming." Panic surged through me. I bit down on his hand as hard as I could. He yelped in pain and loosened his grip. I took the chance to break free, bolting for the door. I flung it open and ran down the hallway, not looking back. The elevator was at the far end, but I didn't want to wait. I spotted the stairwell and dashed inside, taking the steps 2 at a time. My heart pounded as I reached the lobby. The clerk looked up, startled by my disheveled appearance. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Someone's in my room." I gasped. "Call the police." He grabbed the phone, dialing quickly. "Are you hurt?" he asked, glancing at me with concern. I shook my head, trying to catch my breath. "No, but he's dangerous." He had a key card to my room. Minutes later, The police arrived. They went up to my room and found it empty. The man was gone, leaving my belongings scattered across the floor. They took my statement and assured me they would investigate, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The hotel offered me a different room, but I declined. I packed my things and checked out, deciding to find another place to stay. As I drove away, the rain still pouring down, I couldn't stop thinking about how easily things could have gone differently. I spent the next few nights looking over my shoulder, jumpy at every sound. The police never found the man, and I never got answers about how he got my key card. I've stayed in countless hotels since, but I always double-check the locks and keep a weapon within reach. It was late when I checked into the hotel. The rain outside was relentless, and I was soaked by the time I got to my room. All I wanted was a hot shower and some rest. The room was standard: a bed, a desk, a TV mounted on the wall, and a small bathroom. I threw my bags on the bed and headed straight for the shower. Afterward, I felt a bit better. I sat on the bed, flipping through channels on the TV, but nothing interesting was on. That's when I noticed it, a tiny red light blinking near the TV. I walked over and saw a small camera, barely noticeable, hidden between some books on the shelf. My heart started to race. I quickly covered the camera with a towel and called the front desk. "There's a camera in my room," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man on the other end didn't seem surprised. "We'll send someone up to check," he said. A few minutes later, a man in a maintenance uniform knocked on the door. He looked around the room, saw the camera, and shrugged. "Must be a mistake," he said. "We'll take care of it." He left with the camera, but something didn't feel right. Why was he so calm about it? I decided to do some investigating of my own. I started by looking around the room more carefully. I found another camera in the air vent and one more behind the mirror. I called the front desk again, demanding to speak with a manager. This time, a woman came up. She was polite but dismissive. "These things happen," she said. "We'll have maintenance remove the cameras." "These things happen?" I echoed, incredulous. "This is a serious invasion of privacy." She assured me it would be handled, but I wasn't convinced. I decided to check out the hotel's reviews online. Buried among the positive comments, I found a few mentions of hidden cameras and uncooperative staff. It seemed like a pattern. I felt a chill run down my spine. I needed to find out who was behind this. I left my room and started exploring the hotel. I went down to the basement, where I found the security room. The door was locked, but I could hear voices inside. I waited until the voices faded, then used a bobby pin to pick the lock, something I'd seen in movies but never tried before. To my surprise, it worked. The room was filled with monitors, each showing different rooms in the hotel. I saw my own room on one of the screens, the towel still covering the camera. I took photos of the setup with my phone and was about to leave when I heard footsteps. I hid behind a shelf as the maintenance man and the manager walked in. They were talking about how profitable the hidden cameras were and how they had to be more careful since someone had noticed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were recording guests and selling the footage. I had to get out of there and call the police. I waited until they left, then slipped out of the room and headed back to my floor. As I approached my room, I saw the manager and maintenance man standing outside my door, talking in hushed tones. I backed away and took the stairs down to the lobby, hoping they wouldn't see me. At the front desk, I demanded to use the phone. The clerk looked nervous but handed it over. I dialed 911 and explained everything to the dispatcher. They said they'd send someone right away. I waited in the lobby, my heart pounding. When the police arrived, I showed them the photos on my phone and explained what I had found. They took it seriously and went up to the security room. It felt like hours before they came back down. The manager and maintenance man were in handcuffs, looking angry and scared. The police thanked me for bringing it to their attention and said they'd be shutting down the operation. I checked out of the hotel immediately, even though it was still pouring outside. I found another hotel and spent the night there, unable to sleep, still shaken by what had happened. The next day, I went to the police station to give a formal statement. It was an experience I wouldn't wish on anyone. The storm was fierce, and I was relieved to be inside, away from the downpour. The room was nothing special, but it was clean and dry, and that was all I needed. I unpacked a bit and settled in, hoping to get some rest before my meetings the next day. As I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard a strange noise coming from the room next door. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just someone moving furniture or something. I was too tired to care and soon fell asleep. The next morning, I noticed a peculiar smell in the hallway. It was faint but unpleasant, like something rotting. I figured it was just the rain making the place damp and musty. I mentioned it to the front desk on my way out, but they seemed unconcerned and assured me they'd look into it. When I returned that evening, the smell had gotten worse. It was stronger near the room next to mine. I hadn't seen anyone go in or out of that room since I arrived, and the "Do Not Disturb" sign was still on the door. I asked the cleaning staff if they knew anything, but they just shrugged and said the guests probably didn't want to be bothered. That night, the dragging noise started again, louder this time. It was followed by a low, muffled thud. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to knock on the door. There was no answer. I pressed my ear to the door and heard what sounded like heavy breathing. I knocked again, harder this time, but still no response. I went back to my room. I called the front desk again and told them about the noises and the smell. The clerk seemed annoyed and told me they'd handle it. I stayed up late, listening, but eventually fell asleep. The next morning, the smell was overpowering. It was sickeningly sweet and putrid. I saw a maintenance worker in the hallway and mentioned it to him. I asked if they had checked the room, and he said they couldn't enter without the guest's permission. That evening, the smell was unbearable. I couldn't understand why no one was doing anything about it. I knocked on the door again, but there was still no answer. I went to the front desk, demanding that they check the room. The manager reluctantly agreed to accompany me. We knocked on the door together, but there was no response. The manager used a master key to unlock the door, and as soon as it opened, the smell hit us like a wall. It was worse than I had imagined. We entered the room and found it in disarray. The bed was unmade, and clothes were scattered everywhere. In the corner of the room, we found the source of the smell. A large, dark stain spread across the carpet, and something was wrapped in a heavy plastic sheet. The manager pulled it back, revealing the decomposing body of a man. I stumbled back, horrified, as the manager called the police. I gave my statement to the officers when they arrived. They asked if I had seen or heard anything unusual, and I told them about the noises and the smell. I couldn't sleep that night. Every noise made me jump. As I was packing, I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find a man standing there, someone I hadn't seen before. He introduced himself as a detective working on the case. He asked if I could spare a few more minutes to answer some additional questions. I agreed and invited him in. He asked about the noises again and if I had noticed anyone suspicious. I repeated what I had told the police. He thanked me and left. I finished packing and went to the front desk to check out. As I was leaving, I noticed the detective talking to the manager. The detective glanced at me, and I saw a strange look in his eyes. A few days later, I received a call from the police. They informed me that the man found in the room was a known criminal, involved in some dangerous activities. They believed he had been killed by someone he was working with, and that person was still at large. It was pouring rain the night I checked into the hotel. I had been driving for hours, and the storm made the roads too dangerous to continue. The hotel looked pretty standard, nothing fancy, but it was dry and had a bed, which was all I needed. I walked to the front desk, dripping wet, and rang the bell. The night receptionist appeared almost instantly, as if he had been waiting just out of sight. He was a tall, thin man with pale skin and dark hair. His name tag read Ethan. There was something off about the way he smiled at me, but I was too tired to think much of it. He asked for my name and ID, which I handed over. He typed my information into the computer, then looked up at me and said, "Jenna, right? Here for one night?" I nodded, thinking it was normal for him to know since I just gave him my ID. He handed me the key card and told me my room number. "If you need anything, just call the front desk," he said with that same unsettling smile. I thanked him and made my way to the elevator. When I got to my room, I felt a little uneasy, but I chalked it up to exhaustion and the creepy vibe from the receptionist. The room was fine, clean and simple. I took a hot shower to warm up and climbed into bed. As I was drifting off, I thought I heard footsteps outside my door, but when I listened closer, there was nothing. I figured it was just other guests walking by. In the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. I couldn't figure out why at first. Then, I heard it, a faint clicking sound, like a door closing quietly. My heart started pounding. I lay still, straining to hear more. There were soft footsteps, moving slowly away from my room. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe someone going back to their room. The next morning, I felt uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went down to the lobby for breakfast and saw Ethan at the front desk. He smiled at me and said, "Good morning, Jenna. Did you sleep well?" His knowing smile made me feel exposed, like he knew something I didn't. I brushed it off and spent the day out, trying to forget about it. When I returned that night, Ethan was still there. He greeted me with that same unsettling smile. "Back already? How was your day?" I mumbled something polite and hurried to the elevator. That night, I locked the door and put a chair against it for good measure. I felt silly but safer. As I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise made me jump. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, the soft click of a door and quiet footsteps. My heart raced. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I wanted to get up and check, but I was frozen with fear. Minutes felt like hours. Eventually, the footsteps moved away, and I heard the faint click of a door closing again. I stayed awake the rest of the night, terrified. In the morning, I went down to check out. Ethan was there, smiling. "Leaving already?" he asked. I nodded, not wanting to engage. As I handed over the key card, he said, "I hope you had a restful stay, Jenna." His smile sent chills down my spine. As I walked out to my car, I noticed a small piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. It was a note, written in neat handwriting. "I hope you come back soon." No signature, but I knew it was from Ethan. I got in my car and drove away as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was miles away from that hotel. The whole drive, I couldn't stop thinking about how he knew my name and how he had been outside my room at night. I realized then that he must have had a master key. He had been in my room while I slept. I never reported it. I just wanted to forget it ever happened. But every time I stay in a hotel now, I can't help but remember that night and wonder if someone is watching me. I checked into the hotel late, around midnight, exhausted from the long drive. The rain was coming down hard, making it difficult to see the road. The lobby was almost empty, just the night receptionist behind the desk. His name tag said Ethan. He was tall, with dark hair and a pale face. He smiled at me as I walked in, but there was something off about it. I gave him my ID and he typed my details into the computer. Jenna, right? Staying just for the night? He asked. I nodded, not thinking much of it since he had my ID. He handed me the key card and told me my room number. If you need anything, just call the front desk, he said, still smiling. I took the elevator up to my room. It was clean and simple, just what I needed. I took a quick shower and got into bed, hoping to get some rest. As I was drifting off, I thought I heard footsteps outside my door, but when I listened closer, it was quiet. I figured it was just other guests moving around. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling uneasy. There was a faint clicking sound, like a door closing softly. My heart started racing. I listened, holding my breath. I heard soft footsteps moving away from my door. I told myself it was just my imagination and eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I felt a little off, but I brushed it off as just being tired. I went down to the lobby for breakfast. Ethan was there again. Good morning, Jenna. Did you sleep well? He asked, that unsettling smile on his face. I mumbled a yes and quickly left to avoid talking to him. I spent the day out, trying to enjoy myself and forget about the night before. When I returned to the hotel that night, Ethan was still there. Back already? How was your day? He asked. I forced a smile and hurried to the elevator. That night, I locked the door and put a chair against it. I felt silly, but it made me feel safer. I lay in bed, unable to sleep. Every little noise made me jump. Around 2 a.m., I heard the soft click of a door and quiet footsteps again. My heart pounded in my chest. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I was too scared to move. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the footsteps moved away and I heard the faint click of a door closing again. I stayed awake the rest of the night, terrified. In the morning, I went to check out. Ethan was there, smiling as usual. Leaving already? He asked. I nodded, avoiding eye contact. As I handed over the key card, he said, I hope you had a restful stay, Jenna. His words sent chills down my spine. I hurried out to my car. As I got in, I noticed a small piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. It was a note, written in neat handwriting. I hope you come back soon. There was no signature, but I knew it was from Ethan. I drove away as fast as I could, not stopping until I was far from the hotel. The whole drive, I couldn't stop thinking about how he knew my name and how he had been outside my room at night. It dawned on me that he must have had a master key. He had been in my room while I slept. I never reported it. I just wanted to forget it ever happened. But every time I stay in a hotel now, I can't help but remember that night and wonder if someone is watching me. I was exhausted and just wanted to relax. I checked in without any issues and took the elevator up to my room. It was a standard hotel room, nothing fancy, but it was clean and comfortable. I unpacked a few things and settled in for the night. About an hour later, there was a knock on my door. I was surprised because I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in a suit standing there. He looked official, holding a clipboard and wearing a name tag that read Hotel Inspector. I opened the door a crack, keeping the chain on. "Good evening, ma'am," he said with a polite smile. "I'm with the hotel's inspection team. We're conducting routine safety checks in all the rooms. It won't take long." I was hesitant, but he seemed genuine, and I didn't want to cause a fuss. I unlatched the chain and let him in. He walked around the room, checking the smoke detector and the bathroom fixtures. I watched him closely. Something about this felt off. As he moved to the dresser, I noticed he wasn't really inspecting anything. Instead, he was rifling through my personal belongings. He opened drawers, peeking inside my suitcase, even lifting up my clothes. My heart started pounding. This didn't seem right. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up, surprised, then quickly composed himself. "Just checking for any hidden issues, ma'am. It's standard procedure." I didn't buy it. "I think you've seen enough," I said firmly. "Please leave." He hesitated for a moment, then smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, ma'am. If you need anything, just call the front desk." He walked out, and I quickly locked the door behind him, my hands shaking. I leaned against the door, trying to calm down. Something was definitely wrong. I grabbed my phone and called the front desk. "Hi, this is Lisa in room 314. I just had someone claiming to be a hotel inspector in my room. Is that standard procedure?" The receptionist sounded confused. "We don't have any inspections scheduled tonight, ma'am." "Can you describe the person?" I told her what he looked like and what had happened. She apologized and assured me they would look into it immediately. I hung up, still feeling uneasy. I double-checked the lock and even pushed a chair against the door. I tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I decided to check the room myself, making sure nothing was out of place. Everything seemed okay, but I still felt on edge. I sat on the bed, trying to read a book, but I couldn't focus. About an hour later, I heard a noise outside my door. It was the faint sound of footsteps, then a soft scratching noise. My heart leapt into my throat. I turned off the lights and stood by the door, listening. The scratching continued, followed by a quiet click. Someone was trying to pick the lock. I grabbed the phone and dialed the front desk again. "This is Lisa in room 314. Someone is trying to get into my room. Please send security now." I heard hurried footsteps on the other end, and the receptionist assured me help was on the way. I hung up and looked around for something to defend myself with. I grabbed a heavy lamp and stood by the door, ready to swing if necessary. The door handle jiggled, and then there was a loud bang as someone tried to force it open. I backed away, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Moments later, I heard voices and more footsteps. The banging stopped. "Miss Lisa, this is hotel security. Are you all right?" I approached the door cautiously. "Yes, I'm okay," I called out. "Is he gone?" "Yes, ma'am. We have him in custody. You're safe now." I opened the door to see two security guards standing there. One of them explained that the man had been caught trying to break into several rooms. He wasn't an inspector at all, just a criminal looking for easy targets. The next morning, I checked out as soon as I could. I was traveling alone for a work conference, staying in a mid-range hotel that seemed nice enough. My flight was delayed, so I arrived late, checked in, and headed straight to my room. I was exhausted and just wanted to get some sleep. The next morning, I unpacked my suitcase, setting my clothes and toiletries around the room. Everything seemed fine. After a full day of meetings, I returned to my room, looking forward to a quiet evening. But when I walked in, my suitcase was gone. I searched everywhere, thinking maybe I moved it and forgot. The room was small, and it quickly became clear it wasn't there. I went down to the front desk to report it missing. The woman at the desk, Alice, seemed genuinely concerned at first. She asked if I might have left it somewhere else. I explained I had unpacked it in my room that morning. She assured me they would look into it and suggested I might have just misplaced it. That was frustrating. How could I misplace a whole suitcase? I went back to my room, trying to stay calm. I had valuables in that suitcase, my laptop, some jewelry, and important documents for the conference. A few hours later, Alice called to say they hadn't found anything but would keep searching. She suggested I might have left it in a conference room or maybe the hotel bar. I knew that wasn't the case, but I checked anyway. Nothing. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the day in my head, trying to figure out what happened. The next morning, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started asking around, talking to other guests and staff members, hoping someone saw something. Most people were sympathetic but had no information. Around midday, I spoke with one of the cleaning staff, an older lady named Maria. She mentioned seeing a young man, one of the newer employees, hanging around my floor more than usual. She thought it was odd but didn't think much of it at the time. My heart raced. I had a lead. I went back to Alice with this new information. She seemed skeptical but promised to look into it. I decided to follow up myself. I started watching the hotel staff, particularly the newer employees. It didn't take long to notice a young man, maybe in his mid-20s, who seemed a bit too interested in the guests and their rooms. His name tag said David. I saw him hovering near rooms after guests left, always with an excuse if anyone asked. I followed him discreetly for a while, hoping to catch him in the act. My gut told me he was the one. That evening, I saw David enter a guest's room with a master key card. My heart pounded as I crept closer. He emerged a few minutes later, carrying a small bag. I knew I had to act. I waited until he left, then quickly went to Alice with what I saw. Alice looked shocked and called hotel security. They caught David red-handed, and under questioning, he admitted to stealing from multiple guests, including me. He had been using the master key card to enter rooms when guests were out. My suitcase was found in a storage closet along with other stolen items. The hotel manager apologized profusely and assured me they would take action to prevent this from happening again. They offered me a free stay, but I just wanted to get out of there. I packed my things and checked out, relieved to be leaving but still shaken. I learned later that David was arrested, and the hotel implemented stricter security measures. I was grateful to get my belongings back, but the experience left me wary. I was staying at this hotel for a business trip. It wasn't anything fancy, but it seemed decent enough when I checked in. The first night went by without any issues. I attended my meetings and came back to the room to crash. The next night, though, things took a turn. It was past midnight when I realized I left my phone charger in my car. I decided to go get it because my phone was almost dead. I put on my shoes, grabbed my key card, and headed out. The hallway was empty and quiet, and the only sound was the hum of the vending machine near the elevator. I took the elevator down to the parking lot, got my charger, and headed back up to my room. When I got to my door, I swiped the key card, but the light flashed red. I tried again, thinking maybe I swiped it too fast. Still red. I tried a few more times, but it didn't work. Frustrated, I decided to go down to the front desk to get a new key. When I got there, the lobby was empty. No one was at the front desk. I rang the bell, but no one came. I called out, "Hello?" but still, no response. It was late, and I was getting annoyed. I walked around, trying to find someone. The hallways were dimly lit, and the whole place felt eerie. After what felt like forever, I finally saw a guy in a hotel uniform coming out of a door near the laundry room. I called out to him, and he turned to look at me. He smiled and walked over. "Hey, can I help you?" he asked. I told him my key card wasn't working, and I couldn't get into my room. He nodded and said he could help me. He asked for my room number, and I told him. He said he would get a new key card for me. He led me to a back office, saying the system was there, not at the front desk. It seemed odd, but I was tired and just wanted to get back to my room. The office was down a narrow hallway, away from the main lobby. He unlocked the door and gestured for me to go in first. I stepped inside, and that's when I realized something was wrong. The office was messy, with papers everywhere and no computer in sight. Before I could react, I heard the door close behind me. I turned around, and the guy was blocking the doorway. His friendly smile was gone. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, and I backed away until I hit the desk. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. "Just give me your wallet and phone," he said finally, his voice low and menacing. I realized then that this was a setup. He must have seen me leave my room and decided to take advantage of the situation. I handed over my wallet and phone, hoping that would be enough for him to leave me alone. He took them and then looked me over. "Empty your pockets," he demanded. I did as he said, showing him I had nothing else. He seemed satisfied and finally stepped back, opening the door. "Don't make a sound," he warned, "or you'll regret it." I nodded, and he left, closing the door behind him. I waited a few moments, heart pounding, then slowly opened the door. The hallway was empty. I crept back to the lobby, looking around for anyone who could help. The place was still deserted. I finally found a house phone and called the main line. After a few rings, the same guy answered. "Front desk, how can I help you?" he said, his voice back to being friendly. I hung up, realizing he was the only staff around. Desperate, I went back to my room and tried the key card again. This time, the door clicked open. I quickly went inside and locked the door behind me. I sat on the bed, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. In the morning, I went to the front desk and reported everything. They seemed shocked and promised to look into it. They gave me back my wallet and phone, which had been found in a trash can outside. I checked out and moved to a different hotel for the rest of my stay. I never saw that guy again, and the hotel never gave me a clear explanation. But I learned to always be cautious, especially when traveling alone. Last month, I stayed at a small hotel while on a business trip. I was exhausted from the long day and just wanted to relax. When I got to my room, there was a package outside my door. It was addressed to someone else, but the name on the label didn't match anyone I knew. I called the front desk and told them about the package. They said they would look into it and just to leave it where it was for now. I didn't think much of it and went about my evening. Later that night, I decided to check the package out of curiosity. It was a plain brown box with no return address. I opened it, expecting to find something boring, but instead, there were documents inside. As I flipped through them, I realized they were filled with sensitive information, contracts, legal documents, and some handwritten notes that made no sense to me. The more I read, the clearer it became that these documents were important and potentially dangerous. I decided to take the package back to the front desk first thing in the morning. I put everything back in the box and set it aside. That night, I had trouble sleeping, uneasy about the contents of the package. The next morning, I went down to the lobby. The front desk was bustling with activity, but no one seemed to take notice of me at first. I finally got the attention of a young woman working there and explained the situation. She looked at the package and seemed puzzled. "I'll take care of it," she said, but her voice had a nervous edge. I went about my day, thinking little more of it. That evening, as I returned to the hotel, I noticed something odd. There was a man lingering near the entrance, looking around as if he was waiting for someone. I thought nothing of it and went inside. When I got to my room, I noticed a few missed calls on my phone. They were from an unknown number. I dismissed them and went to bed. In the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a loud knock on my door. My heart raced as I got out of bed and looked through the peephole. I saw the same man from earlier standing outside, his face hidden in the shadows. I didn't open the door. I quietly picked up my phone and called the front desk. No one answered. I was starting to panic. The knocking continued, louder and more insistent. I decided to call 911. As I was dialing, I heard a loud crash from the hallway, like something heavy being thrown. I hung up and ducked down behind the bed, hoping the intruder wouldn't hear me. I could hear footsteps approaching my door. They stopped right outside, and I held my breath, hoping they would just leave. The door handle rattled, but it didn't open. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps receded. I waited a few more minutes before daring to peek out. The hallway was quiet again. I quickly grabbed my things, went to the window, and climbed out onto the fire escape. It was raining heavily, and I was soaked in seconds, but I didn't care. I needed to get out of there. I made my way down the fire escape, and as soon as I hit the ground, I ran to the nearest street and called a cab. I told the driver to take me to a nearby police station. I explained everything to the officers there, and they promised to look into it. They said it was good that I left the hotel. They had received reports of a possible threat to my safety. After everything, I never went back to that hotel, and I'm still not sure what was in those documents or why they were so important. I moved to a new place and stayed cautious. The whole ordeal made me realize how dangerous situations can escalate quickly, especially when dealing with things that don't seem right. Last month, I stayed at a hotel for a work conference. I checked in late and was exhausted, so I went straight to bed. The room was quiet, and I fell asleep quickly. In the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. I heard something unusual, a faint rustling noise. I turned on the lamp next to my bed and noticed something alarming. There was someone lying on the floor across the room. I was confused and terrified. I jumped out of bed and moved closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The stranger looked disheveled and seemed to be sleeping soundly. I could barely make out his features in the dim light, but he was definitely not someone I recognized. I checked the door. It was still locked. I didn't know how he got in. Panicking, I shook him awake. He groggily opened his eyes and looked at me, startled. "What are you doing in my room?" I demanded. He seemed disoriented and mumbled something about being in the wrong room. I didn't believe him for a second. I demanded that he get up and leave. As he stumbled to his feet, I noticed he had a key card in his hand. It was a master key card, the kind that can open any door in the hotel. My mind raced. How did he get that? I told him to leave and followed him out of the room, keeping a safe distance. He didn't argue and quickly went down the hall and disappeared into the stairwell. Shaking, I went to the front desk to report what had happened. The night clerk, a young man named Tom, listened to my story with a forced expression of concern. When I mentioned the master key card, his face went pale. He assured me someone would investigate it, but his demeanor seemed off. I decided to investigate myself. I returned to my room and looked through the small drawer where the hotel's guest information was kept. I found an old list of employees and their duties. It seemed Tom was listed as a night auditor, which meant he had access to the master key cards. Feeling uneasy, I decided to call the local police. They arrived quickly and started questioning Tom. They told me they had received complaints before about missing items and unauthorized access in various rooms. It seemed that Tom had been giving out spare key cards to strangers for money. The police took Tom into custody, and the hotel manager apologized profusely, assuring me that they would tighten their security and review their procedures. I was relieved but still shaken. I had no idea what could have happened if I hadn't woken up. The police also found other guests who had been affected, and they were informed. The next day, I checked out of the hotel and moved to a different one. I'm still unsettled by how easily things could have gone wrong. I recently stayed at a hotel while on a business trip. It was a last-minute booking, and the place seemed decent enough. When I checked in, everything seemed normal. The front desk clerk was friendly, and my room was clean. I settled in and decided to relax after a long drive. That night, I noticed something odd. The carpet in the corner of my room seemed uneven. It looked like there was a slight bulge under it. Out of curiosity, I lifted the corner of the carpet and saw what looked like a small latch. It was rusted and old, but it was definitely a latch. My heart raced as I tried to figure out what it was. After a few moments of hesitation, I decided to open it. To my surprise, there was a trapdoor underneath. It was heavy, but I managed to lift it with some effort. Underneath was a narrow, dark passageway. The thought of a hidden tunnel was unsettling, but my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight from my bag and decided to explore. The tunnel was cramped and musty. It seemed to stretch on for a while. As I walked, the air grew cooler, and the sound of my footsteps echoed eerily. I noticed that the walls were lined with old, dirty bricks. The tunnel seemed to lead deeper underground. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a fork in the tunnel. I chose the left path, which led to a small, dimly lit room. The room was cluttered with old furniture, filing cabinets, and boxes. There were also several security monitors displaying various areas of the hotel. My blood ran cold when I realized what I was looking at. The cameras were showing live feeds of different parts of the hotel, including my own room. Panic set in. I quickly turned back and retraced my steps, trying to stay calm. As I moved, I heard voices coming from deeper within the tunnels. I recognized the voices from earlier when I had passed by the front desk. They sounded like they were coming from a group of men discussing something in low tones. I made my way back to the trapdoor and pulled it open. I climbed out and put the carpet back in place, trying to make it look like nothing had happened. My heart was pounding, and I was terrified. I had to get out of that hotel as quickly as possible. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. I told them everything I had seen and heard. They arrived within minutes and took over. They went into the tunnel while I waited outside with a sense of dread. After a while, they came back and confirmed my worst fears. The tunnel was part of a network used by criminals for various illegal activities, including unauthorized surveillance and possibly other crimes. The hotel manager was informed, and the entire place was shut down for an investigation. I was given a full refund and promised that the matter would be dealt with. I had to stay in another hotel for the rest of my trip. The experience left me shaken, and I couldn't stop thinking about how easily things could have gone horribly wrong. I'm still not sure how the trapdoor ended up in my room or how long the tunnel had been in use. All I know is that it was a close call. I stayed at a hotel last month while on a business trip. It was a high-end place, and I expected everything to be top-notch. After a long day of meetings, I got back to my room, ordered room service, and planned to relax before a big presentation the next day. Around midnight, I was just about to fall asleep when the phone in my room rang. It was odd because I hadn't made any calls. I picked it up, and there was silence on the other end. I thought it was a wrong number or maybe just a glitch, so I hung up and went back to bed. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, a message appeared on the small screen. It was a text, not a call. It read, "We have pictures of you. If you don't want them shared, you know what to do." My heart sank. I didn't recognize the number. I checked my phone for any recent photos, but nothing was out of the ordinary. Panic set in. I tried to call the front desk, but the line was dead. I got dressed quickly and went downstairs. The lobby was deserted. I approached the receptionist and asked about the phone issue. He seemed confused and said everything was working fine. I mentioned the threatening message, but he looked at me like I was crazy. I went back to my room and tried to make sense of the situation. My mind raced. Who could be behind this? What photos were they talking about? I thought about the security cameras in the hotel. If anyone had taken photos of me, they would have shown up somewhere on the hotel's network. I decided to check the hotel security. I went back to the lobby and found the manager. I told him about the threats and asked to see the security footage. He agreed, and we went to the security office. The footage showed nothing suspicious. No one entered my room, and no one approached my door. The manager seemed concerned and offered to call the police. I agreed, hoping they could help find who was behind this. While waiting, I returned to my room and noticed the phone was working again. Another message came through, "You're wasting time. Act fast or the pictures go public." Desperate, I tried to think of who could have access to such information. I remembered a few people I had interacted with during my stay, room service, housekeeping, and a few other staff members. I decided to go back to the front desk to see if anyone had acted suspiciously. I spoke to the receptionist again, and he mentioned a staff member who had access to all the rooms. His name was Steve, and he seemed nervous when I asked about him. I had a hunch, so I went to find Steve. He was in the staff lounge, looking restless. I confronted him about the messages and the photos. Steve's face turned pale. He admitted to sending the messages but claimed he was only trying to scare me. He said he had no real photos and was just trying to extort money from me. He was a small-time crook who thought he could get away with it. I called the police and explained everything. Steve was taken into custody, and they assured me the situation was under control. They checked his devices and found no compromising photos. It turned out he had been bluffing all along. The police continued their investigation, and the hotel offered me a full refund and additional compensation for the distress. I stayed at a hotel last month while on a business trip. It was a nice place, or so I thought. Everything seemed fine until I started noticing that my belongings were not where I left them. I'd put my laptop bag in one spot, and it would be in another. I thought I might be just forgetting where I put things, so I brushed it off initially. One night, I came back to my room after dinner and saw that my suitcase was unzipped. I was certain I had zipped it up before I left. I checked inside, but nothing seemed out of place. The next day, I returned to my room to find that the drawer in the nightstand was slightly open, even though I remembered closing it. I began to get uneasy. I decided to do something about it. I set up a small camera I had brought along just in case I needed it for work. I placed it in a spot where I could see most of the room, including the areas where my belongings had been moved. I hoped to catch something that would explain why my things were being disturbed. That night, I went to bed, trying not to think too much about it. Around midnight, I was woken by a noise. I checked the camera feed on my phone and saw someone entering my room. It was one of the housekeepers. They started going through my things, pulling out drawers, rifling through my suitcase, and even looking under the bed. They were clearly searching for something. I felt a cold sweat run down my back. I had no idea what they were looking for or why they were targeting me. I was sure they knew I had the camera. They glanced around the room suspiciously, but they didn't notice it. The next morning, I went straight to the front desk and asked to speak with the manager. I didn't mention the camera, but told him that I suspected someone on the staff had been entering my room and moving my belongings. The manager seemed concerned and promised to look into it. He said it would take some time to investigate, but assured me that the matter would be handled. I went back to my room, feeling nervous but hoping the issue would be resolved. Later that day, I noticed that the camera I had set up was gone. It had been taken while I was out. My heart pounded. If they had found the camera, they must have known I was onto them. I decided to take extra precautions. I avoided leaving my room alone and started keeping my valuables on me whenever I left. I also made sure to keep an eye on the camera feed from my phone, hoping to catch any more suspicious activity. That night, I caught another glimpse of the same housekeeper. They were back in my room, but this time, they were more cautious. They seemed to be looking around for something else, but they left without finding what they were looking for. The next morning, I went to the front desk again and demanded to know what was being done about the situation. The manager finally admitted that there had been some disciplinary action taken, but he wouldn't give me details. I was relieved but still shaken. I checked out of the hotel that day and made sure to inform the authorities about what had happened. I didn't want anyone else to go through what I did. The hotel offered me a refund and some compensation for the trouble, but it didn't erase the anxiety I felt during those days. In the end, I was just grateful to have left that place unharmed. It was a terrifying experience, knowing that someone was going through my personal things and that they might have turned on me if they felt threatened. I was staying at this hotel for a work trip and checked in late in the evening. I was tired and just wanted to get to my room and sleep. When I got to my floor, the key card didn't work. I went back to the front desk, and the clerk apologized, saying there was a mix-up. He reprogrammed a new card and told me it should work. I went back to my floor, and to my surprise, the new cart opened a door that wasn't mine. I thought maybe there was some mistake, but went inside anyway, figuring I'd sort it out once I got some rest. The room looked normal at first glance, but something felt off. I noticed a briefcase on the floor near the bed that wasn't there when I had checked in. It wasn't locked or secured in any way, so curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. Inside were bundles of cash, several fake IDs, and documents with names and addresses I didn't recognize. It looked like some kind of criminal operation. My heart started racing. I knew I should contact the police, but I didn't want to get involved in something dangerous or make a wrong move. I decided to call the front desk first to sort out the room mix-up. While I was on the phone with the desk, I heard the elevator ding and footsteps in the hallway. I wasn't sure who it was, but it felt wrong. The footsteps got closer to the room. Panic set in. I knew I couldn't stay in the room any longer. I quickly gathered my things, shoved the briefcase back into its place, and headed for the door. Just as I reached the hallway, I saw two men in dark suits stepping off the elevator. They looked around with intent, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to act casual and walked towards the stairs. I could hear their voices getting louder behind me, mentioning something about a messed up deal. My heart pounded as I hurried down the stairs and out through the back exit. I glanced back and saw them looking around, clearly frustrated. I didn't want to lead them to my own room or get them suspicious of me, so I made my way to a nearby cafe that was still open and called the police. While I waited for the police to arrive, I kept my eyes peeled. I didn't see the men again, but my nerves were shot. The police finally showed up, and I gave them all the details I could. They seemed to take it seriously and said they'd investigate. I left the hotel as soon as I could. I was terrified that the criminals would find me, but I had to get out. The whole situation was surreal. I never thought I'd stumble into something so dangerous just because of a hotel room mix-up. The police assured me they would handle it, but I was shaken for days. I don't know what happened to the criminals or if they were ever caught, but I learned to be extra cautious about where I stay and to always double-check my room before settling in. I was on a solo road trip and decided to stay at a small hotel off the highway. It was late when I arrived, and the rain was coming down hard. The hotel was quiet and seemed decent enough, though it was a bit worn down. After checking in and getting to my room, I noticed an unmarked van parked outside the hotel. I thought it was strange, but I didn't pay it much attention. I was too tired and just wanted to relax. I ordered some takeout and spent the evening in my room. Around midnight, I went outside to get some fresh air. The rain had let up a little, and I noticed that the van was still there. It was parked right where I had seen it earlier, but now the headlights were on. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just a coincidence. The next morning, I noticed the van again as I left the hotel to grab breakfast. It was parked across the street, and the same person seemed to be inside, watching me. It made me uneasy, but I brushed it off as paranoia. I had no reason to think someone was actually following me. After breakfast, I decided to head to a nearby park to clear my head. As I pulled out of the hotel parking lot, the van followed me. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, but the van stayed behind me the entire way. I could feel my anxiety rising, and by the time I reached the park, I was on edge. I parked and tried to take a walk to calm down, but the van parked a few spots away from me. The same person was still inside, staring straight ahead. My heart raced, and I decided it was time to go back to the hotel. I had to get out of there. When I returned to the hotel, I saw the van waiting outside the entrance. I felt trapped. I tried to go around the van to get into the hotel, but it moved to block my path. My pulse quickened as I realized something was seriously wrong. I went back to my car and tried to call the front desk from my phone. The line was dead. I couldn't reach anyone inside. I glanced back at the van and saw the person inside getting out and heading towards the hotel entrance. I knew I had to get away from the van and the hotel. I quickly pulled out of the parking lot and drove to the nearest police station. My hands were shaking as I explained everything to the officers. They took my report seriously and promised to send someone to check out the situation at the hotel. I didn't go back to the hotel. I stayed at a different place that night and waited for the police to give me an update. They told me they had found the van and talked to the occupants. Apparently, the people in the van were involved in some shady business, and they had been following me for a while. I was staying at a hotel downtown, just a quick business trip. The night was stormy, rain pounding on the window, and I couldn't sleep. I got up and looked out, trying to calm my mind. That's when I saw something across the street. A woman was struggling with two men near a dark van. At first, I thought maybe it was some drunk people fighting, but then I saw the fear on her face. I could see the men shoving her into the van. I grabbed my phone and called 911, telling them what I saw. They said they were sending someone, but I knew it might be too late by the time they got there. I watched as the van sped off into the night. I sat back down, heart racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. My mind was spinning. I started to wonder if they had seen me watching. I felt a chill run down my spine. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched too. A few minutes later, there was a knock on my door. I thought it might be hotel security or the police, but when I looked through the peephole, I didn't recognize the man standing there. He looked rough, and something about him made me uneasy. I stayed quiet, hoping he'd go away. Then he knocked again, harder this time. "Hotel security," he called out, but I didn't buy it. He didn't look like hotel security. I backed away from the door, trying to think. If he was with those men, then they knew I had seen them. They knew I was a witness. I grabbed my things quickly, trying to stay calm. I needed to get out of there. I remembered the emergency stairs at the end of the hallway. I slipped on my shoes and grabbed my bag, moving as quietly as I could. The knocking turned into pounding, and I knew I didn't have much time. I opened the door a crack, just enough to see if the hallway was clear. The man was still at my door, so I slipped out and headed for the stairs. I was shaking, trying to be as quiet as possible. The pounding on my door stopped, and I heard him cursing. He must have realized I was gone. I made it to the stairwell and started down, moving as fast as I could without making too much noise. Every creak and groan of the old stairs seemed too loud. I kept glancing back, expecting to see him coming after me. As I reached the ground floor, I heard footsteps above me. They were coming down fast. I pushed open the door to the lobby, trying to blend in. I moved quickly towards the front entrance, but I didn't run. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. Outside, the rain was still pouring. I darted into the street, looking for a cab. I could see a few parked down the block. I ran, not caring about the rain soaking me through. I glanced back and saw the man burst out of the hotel entrance. He spotted me and started running too. I reached the cabs and jumped into the first one, shouting for the driver to go. He hesitated for a second, probably because I was dripping wet and looked terrified, but then he saw the man running towards us and hit the gas. We sped off, and I felt a wave of relief. I told the driver to take me to the nearest police station. I couldn't stop shaking. I kept looking back, expecting to see the van or the man following us. We made it to the station, and I practically ran inside, explaining everything to the officers. They took me seriously, probably because I was a mess and genuinely terrified. They got my statement and said they'd look into it. I knew it might take time, but at least I was safe for now. They arranged for me to stay somewhere else for the night, somewhere secure. That night was the longest of my life. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering how close I had come to being the next victim. The police found the woman from the van a few days later. She was shaken but alive, and the men were arrested. It took a while for the fear to fade, and I still get nervous when I hear a knock at the door late at night. I had checked into a motel for the night, a small place off the highway, nothing fancy. I just needed a place to rest. The walls were thin, and I could hear murmurs from the room next door. At first, I thought it was just a normal conversation, but then I caught snippets that made my blood run cold. They were talking about something big, something illegal. I heard them mention names I recognized from the news, high-profile criminals. My heart started pounding. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was none of my business. But the more I listened, the clearer it became. They were planning something dangerous. I moved closer to the wall, trying to hear better. One voice stood out, deep and commanding. He was giving orders, talking about shipments and payments. Another voice was nervous, asking questions, seeking reassurance. They were talking about a deal going down the next day. I felt a knot in my stomach. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, and I jumped back. The room next door fell silent. I held my breath, hoping they hadn't heard me. Then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving towards the door. My heart was racing, and I backed away from the wall, trying to act natural. A moment later, there was a knock on my door. I froze, not sure what to do. The knock came again, harder this time. I knew I couldn't ignore it. I opened the door a crack, peering out. A tall man in a dark suit was standing there, his eyes cold and hard. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He stared at me for a moment, then said, "We heard some noise from your room. Everything okay in here?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just watching TV. Sorry if I was too loud." He didn't seem convinced. He glanced around the room, then looked back at me. "Keep it down," he said, then turned and walked away. I closed the door, my hands shaking. I knew I had to get out of there. I quickly packed my things, trying to be as quiet as possible. I didn't want to draw any more attention to myself. I could still hear them talking next door, but now their voices were lower, more guarded. I slipped out of my room and headed for the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the lobby, I saw the man in the suit talking to the desk clerk. I ducked behind a pillar, trying to stay out of sight. I could hear them talking about me, describing my appearance. They knew I had heard them, and they weren't going to let me leave. I knew I had to get to my car and get out of there. I waited until the man in the suit walked away, then I made a run for it. The rain was pouring down, and I slipped on the wet pavement, but I didn't stop. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. Just as I got the door open, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw the man in the suit coming towards me, his face twisted with anger. I jumped into the car and locked the doors, then started the engine. He pounded on the window, shouting at me to open the door. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I threw the car into reverse and backed out of the parking space, then sped out of the lot. I could see him in the rearview mirror, watching me as I drove away. I didn't slow down until I was miles away, my heart still racing. I drove to the nearest police station and told them everything. They took my statement and assured me they would investigate. I knew it wasn't over, though. Those men knew who I was, and they wouldn't forget. I had heard too much, and now I was a target. The police put me in touch with a safe house, a place where I could stay until it was safe. I spent the next few days looking over my shoulder, jumping at every noise. I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever, but for now, I was safe. The police eventually caught the criminals, and they were arrested. I don't stay in motels anymore, and I don't eavesdrop on conversations. I learned my lesson that night. Sometimes, it's better not to know. I was exhausted and just wanted to get to my room and crash. The lobby was quiet, and I didn't see anyone at the front desk. I grabbed my key card and headed for the elevator. When I got to my floor, I went to my room and tried to unlock the door. The key card didn't work. I went back down to the lobby to get it sorted out. The night clerk looked at my card and gave me a new one. I went back up, tried the new card, and it worked. I walked into what I thought was my room, but something felt off. The layout was the same, but the bed was unmade, and there were clothes and a suitcase that weren't mine. I realized then that this wasn't my room. As I stood there, confused, I heard the sound of the shower running. Panic started to set in. I needed to get out before whoever was in there saw me. I turned to leave, but then I heard the water stop. My heart was racing. I bolted for the door, but it was too late. A man walked out of the bathroom, a towel around his waist, and stopped dead when he saw me. "What the hell are you doing in here?" he shouted, his face turning red with anger. "I'm sorry. I think there's been a mix-up," I stammered, trying to stay calm. "I didn't mean to come in here." He looked at me for a second, then his expression changed. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something darker. "You're not supposed to be here," he said quietly. "Who sent you?" "No one sent me," I said, backing towards the door. It was just a mistake. He didn't believe me. He grabbed his phone and started dialing. I didn't wait to see who he was calling. I ran out of the room and down the hallway. I didn't stop until I was back in the lobby. The night clerk was gone, and the place was empty. I needed help, but I didn't know where to go. I saw a small office behind the front desk and went in, hoping to find a phone or something. There was a computer, and I started searching for the hotel's contact information. I needed to tell someone what happened. As I was typing, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw the man from the room standing in the doorway, his phone still in his hand. "You shouldn't have run," he said, stepping closer. "Now they know." "Who knows?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "They know you're here. They think you're involved," he said, his eyes narrowing. "You need to come with me." "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said, backing up against the desk. "I don't know what you're talking about." He lunged at me, but I managed to duck and run past him. I raced out of the office and down a hallway I hadn't noticed before. It was dark, and I could barely see, but I kept going. I heard him behind me, getting closer. I needed to find a way out. I found a door at the end of the hallway and pushed it open. It led to a stairwell. I ran down the stairs, my legs burning with every step. I could still hear him behind me, but he was getting further away. I reached the bottom and found another door. It led to a parking garage. I saw a security booth and ran towards it, hoping someone would be there. The booth was empty, but there was a phone. I grabbed it and dialed 911, my hands shaking. As I waited for someone to answer, I saw headlights approaching. It was a car, and it was coming fast. I ducked behind the booth, hoping they wouldn't see me. The car stopped, and I heard doors opening. I peeked out and saw two men getting out, one of them the guy from the room. They were looking around, trying to find me. I stayed as still as I could, praying they wouldn't come my way. The phone finally connected, and I whispered to the operator what was happening. She told me to stay on the line and that help was on the way. I just needed to stay hidden a little longer. The men walked past the booth, not seeing me. I watched as they searched the garage, getting further away. I stayed crouched behind the booth, my heart pounding in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, I heard sirens in the distance. I stayed hidden until the police arrived. I took a seat at a table near the back, away from the few people inside. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through some messages. I wasn't paying much attention when two men walked in. They didn't look any different from the usual late-night crowd, so I didn't think much of it. They took a seat at the booth behind me, and I could hear them talking in low voices. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their conversation caught my attention. "Everything's set for tomorrow night," one of them said. His voice was rough, like he'd been smoking all his life. "You sure no one's gonna be there?" the other one asked. He sounded nervous, jittery. "Positive. The place will be empty. We go in, get the cash, and get out. Easy job." My heart started pounding. They were talking about a robbery. I tried to keep my cool and not let on that I was listening. I glanced around the diner, but no one else seemed to notice. The men kept talking, going over details, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They mentioned a warehouse and a lot of money. Then, I made the mistake of shifting slightly in my chair. The noise must have caught their attention. The talking stopped, and I could feel their eyes on me. I didn't dare look back. "Did you hear something?" the nervous one asked. "Yeah," the rough voice replied. "Hey, you." I tried to act casual as I turned around. "Yeah." "What are you doing back here?" the rough one asked. He had a hard look in his eyes that made my stomach drop. "Just waiting for my coffee," I said, trying to sound calm. "You hear anything you shouldn't have?" he asked, leaning forward. "No, just minding my own business," I lied. He stared at me for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Make sure it stays that way." I nodded and turned back around, my heart racing. I needed to get out of there. My coffee came, and I quickly paid, leaving a generous tip for the waitress. As I walked out, I could feel their eyes on me. I kept my pace steady until I was outside, then hurried to my car. Once I was safely inside, I called the police and told them everything. They took down the details and said they'd look into it. I drove home, constantly checking my rearview mirror to make sure I wasn't being followed. I couldn't sleep that night. Every noise made me jump. I kept thinking about those men and what they might do if they found out I'd reported them. The next day, I went to work as usual, but I was on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder. A few days later, I was walking to my car after my shift when I noticed a man standing across the street, watching me. It was the nervous one from the diner. Panic surged through me. I quickly got into my car and drove off, trying to stay calm. I drove around for a while, making sure I wasn't being followed before heading home. That night, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't want to answer, but something told me I should. When I picked up, No one spoke. I could hear breathing on the other end, then a click as they hung up. I knew it was them. They knew where I lived. I called the police again, but they said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. They advised me to stay vigilant and report any suspicious activity. It wasn't much comfort. For the next few days, I was a wreck. I barely slept, and when I did, I had nightmares about those men finding me. I saw the nervous one a couple more times, always watching from a distance. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped, always looking over my shoulder. Then, one night, I heard a noise outside my apartment. It was late, and the neighborhood was quiet. I peeked out the window and saw a shadowy figure standing by my car. My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator what was happening. The figure moved towards my building, and I knew I couldn't stay. I slipped out the back door and ran to a neighbor's house, banging on the door until they let me in. I was staying at a hotel with my friend, Sarah. We were in town for a concert, just a weekend trip to have some fun. We got our room keys, went up to our room, and settled in. The hotel wasn't anything fancy, just a typical mid-range place, but it was clean and comfortable. After a long day of travel, we decided to get some sleep. Sarah said she was going to grab a drink from the vending machine down the hall. I was tired and told her I'd wait for her in the room. She grabbed her key and left. I lay down on the bed, scrolling through my phone to pass the time. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I started to get worried. Sarah wasn't the type to take this long for something simple. I got up and went to the door, opened it, and looked down the hallway. It was empty. I called out her name, but there was no answer. My heart started to pound in my chest. I stepped out of the room and walked to the vending machines. No sign of her. I went down to the front desk and asked if they'd seen her. The night clerk gave me a puzzled look and said no one matching her description had come by. I insisted she was just getting a drink. The clerk checked the security cameras but said they didn't see anyone in the hallways or near the vending machines. Panic set in. I went back to the room, hoping she'd return. An hour passed. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Something was very wrong. I decided to go back to the front desk and demand they take another look. This time, a different clerk was there. I explained everything again, and they checked the records. According to their system, Sarah had never checked in. They had no record of her at all. I was furious and scared. I knew she was here. I had seen her walk out of the room. The clerk suggested I might be mistaken. Maybe she checked into another hotel. But I knew that wasn't true. I went back to the room, trying to think. As I sat there, I noticed something strange. A piece of paper sticking out from under the bed. I pulled it out and saw it was a business card for a local nightclub. It seemed out of place. I decided to investigate. The nightclub was a seedy place in a rundown part of town. I showed the card to the bouncer, and he let me in without a word. The inside was dark and loud, filled with smoke and the smell of alcohol. I felt out of place and nervous, but I had to find Sarah. I wandered around, asking people if they'd seen her. Most ignored me, but one man pulled me aside. He said he saw a girl matching her description with a group of men. He told me they were part of a trafficking ring operating out of the hotel. My blood ran cold. He warned me to leave and forget I ever saw anything. But I couldn't just leave Sarah. I went back to the hotel, my mind racing. I needed a plan. I couldn't trust the staff, and I couldn't call the police without proof. I decided to check the basement, thinking maybe there was more to this place. I found a door marked employees only and managed to slip inside when no one was looking. The basement was dark and damp, filled with storage boxes and cleaning supplies. I carefully made my way through, trying not to make any noise. At the far end, I saw a door slightly ajar with light spilling out. I crept closer and peeked inside. My heart nearly stopped. There were several men inside, talking in hushed tones. I saw Sarah, tied to a chair, looking terrified. I knew I had to act fast. I quietly backed away and looked for something to use as a weapon. I found a heavy metal pipe and gripped it tightly. I waited for the right moment, then burst into the room, swinging the pipe with all my strength. I caught one of the men off guard, knocking him to the ground. The others turned to me, shocked. I yelled at Sarah to run. She struggled to her feet, and I fought off the men as best I could. We managed to escape the room and run back upstairs. We burst out of the basement and into the lobby. I screamed for help, and this time, a few guests took notice. I dropped my bags, took off my shoes, and collapsed on the bed. The room smelled a bit musty, and the sheets were scratchy, but I was too tired to care. I fell asleep almost immediately. When I woke up, something felt wrong. The room was different. It wasn't the same dingy room I remembered. The bed was in a different spot, the walls were a different color, and the musty smell was gone. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to make sense of it. My bags were gone, and my shoes were missing. Panic started to set in. I got out of bed and looked around. There was no sign of my things anywhere. I checked the bathroom, but it was empty too. I felt a cold sweat forming on my forehead. How did I get here? Where were my things? I hurried out of the room and went to the front desk. The clerk looked up from his computer with a bored expression. I told him there had been a mistake, that I woke up in the wrong room and all my belongings were missing. He stared at me for a moment, then said he had no record of me ever staying in the original room. I felt my stomach drop. I insisted I had checked in last night, gave him my name and the room number. He checked the computer again and shook his head. There was no record of me checking in, he said. It was like I had never been there. I demanded to see the manager. The clerk sighed and called him out. The manager came out, an older man with a stern look on his face. I explained everything again, but he just looked at me like I was crazy. He said I must have checked into a different motel. I knew that wasn't true. Frustrated and scared, I asked if they had security cameras. The manager nodded and led me to the back office. He pulled up the footage from last night, and sure enough, there I was, checking in. But then the footage skipped. 1 minute I was at the front desk, the next I was gone. There was no footage of me walking to my room or anything after that. The manager shrugged and said the cameras must have malfunctioned. I didn't believe him. Something was very wrong here. I asked if they could check the room I originally checked into, but the manager said it was occupied and he couldn't disturb the guests. I felt trapped. I didn't have my phone, my wallet, or my keys. I asked if they could at least call the police. The manager hesitated but eventually agreed. He called them, and a few minutes later, an officer arrived. I told the officer everything, but he seemed skeptical. He said it sounded like I might have had a bit too much to drink and got confused. I insisted I hadn't been drinking, that something strange was going on. The officer took my statement but didn't seem too interested in investigating further. He said he'd file a report, but there wasn't much he could do without more evidence. I felt helpless. I decided to go back to the room I woke up in and see if I could find any clues. I searched every inch of that room but found nothing. No sign of my belongings, no hint of what had happened. It was like I had just appeared there out of nowhere. Hours passed and I still had no answers. I was exhausted, scared, and completely at a loss. I decided to leave the motel and try to find a way home. I walked for what felt like miles until I found a diner. I went inside and asked to use their phone. I called a friend and explained what happened. He came to pick me up and I finally felt a bit of relief. We drove back to the motel, but by the time we got there, the place was closed. The sign was off and the doors were locked. I couldn't believe it. It was like the motel had just vanished. My friend tried to reassure me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. We drove back to his place and I crashed on his couch, my mind racing with unanswered questions. The next day, I went back to the motel, but it was still closed. I called the police again, but they said there was nothing they could do without more evidence. I felt like I was losing my mind. In the end, I never found out what happened that night. I checked into the motel around 8 p.m., tired from driving all day. The place wasn't great, but it was cheap, and I just needed a bed for the night. My room was small, with a worn-out carpet and a faint smell of mildew. The walls were thin. I could hear the TV from the room next door. Around 10 p.m., I started hearing strange noises. At first, I thought it was just the TV, but then I realized it was something else. It sounded like someone moving heavy things. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe the person next door was rearranging furniture or something. I tried to ignore it, but the noises kept getting louder. Around midnight, I heard the door next to mine open and close multiple times. I looked out my window and saw a man carrying heavy bags to his car. It was odd because the bags looked heavy, and he was making several trips. I wondered what he could be doing so late at night. Curiosity got the better of me. I decided to step outside and get a closer look. I stayed in the shadows, watching him load the bags into the trunk of his car. He looked around nervously, checking to see if anyone was watching. I felt a chill run down my spine. I went back to my room and tried to sleep, but I couldn't stop thinking about the man and the bags. Around 2 a.m., I heard more noises. This time, it sounded like something heavy being dragged across the floor. My heart raced as I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to figure out what was going on. I knew I shouldn't get involved, but I couldn't help it. I decided to investigate. I quietly left my room and crept down the hallway to the door of the room next to mine. The door was slightly ajar. I peeked inside and saw the man dragging a large, heavy bag across the floor. He was sweating and breathing heavily. I noticed a dark stain on the carpet and felt a surge of panic. I knew something was very wrong. I backed away, trying to stay quiet, but I must have made a noise because the man suddenly looked up and saw me. His eyes were cold and filled with anger. I ran back to my room and locked the door, my heart pounding. I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering to the operator about what I had seen. The operator told me to stay on the line and wait for the police to arrive. A few minutes later, I heard a knock on my door. I froze, my mind racing. It was the man. He called out, saying he knew I was in there and that I had seen too much. He demanded I open the door. I stayed silent, hoping he would go away, but he started pounding on the door, shouting that he would break it down. I heard sirens in the distance and prayed the police would get there in time. The man continued to pound on the door, and I could hear the wood starting to splinter. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob, trying to buy myself some time. The sirens grew louder, and I heard the sound of car doors slamming. The man stopped pounding and cursed under his breath. I heard him run down the hallway. A moment later, the police were at my door, telling me it was safe to come out. I opened the door, shaking with fear. The police officers quickly surrounded me, asking if I was okay. I told them about the man and what I had seen. They searched the motel and found him trying to escape through a back entrance. He was arrested, and the police discovered the bags were filled with stolen goods from a series of burglaries in the area. I was shaken but relieved that the nightmare was over. The police took my statement and assured me that I had done the right thing by calling them. They moved me to a different room for the night, and I barely slept, still haunted by what had happened. The next morning, I checked out of the motel as soon as I could. I felt a sense of relief as I drove away, knowing that the man was in custody and that I was safe. When I opened the door, I felt relieved. It was a basic room with a bed, a small desk, and an old TV mounted on the wall. I tossed my bag on the bed and went to take a shower. I let the hot water wash away the grime and fatigue of the road. When I got out, I changed into fresh clothes and decided to grab some dinner from a diner I saw down the road. I returned about an hour later, feeling better with a full stomach. But when I swiped my key card and pushed open the door, my stomach dropped. The room looked different. My bag was gone, replaced by a leather suitcase and clothes that weren't mine strewn across the bed. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Had I walked into the wrong room? I checked the door number 202. It was the right room. I went down to the front desk. The clerk, a tired-looking guy in his 50s, glanced up at me. "Can I help you?" "There's someone else's stuff in my room," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He frowned and tapped on his computer. "What's your name?" Max Turner." "I checked in about 2 hours ago." He typed for a moment, then shook his head. "I don't have a Max Turner in the system." "Are you sure you checked in here?" I felt a surge of frustration. "Yes, I'm sure. I have the key card right here." I held it up. He glanced at it and shrugged. "That key card belongs to room 202, but it's registered to a Mr. Robert Klein. I don't have any record of a Max Turner." My heart started to race. This didn't make any sense. "Can you check again? Maybe there's been a mistake." He sighed and typed some more, then shook his head. "No mistake. You're not in the system." I stood there, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. "Well, can you at least tell me where my stuff is?" He shrugged again. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe you should call the police if you think something's been stolen." I didn't like the idea of calling the police, but I didn't know what else to do. I went back to room 202 and knocked. No answer. I used the key card to open the door and stepped inside. The suitcase and clothes were still there, but there was no sign of my bag. I started searching the room, hoping to find some clue about what was going on. As I rummaged through the drawers, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I turned and saw a man standing in the doorway. He was tall, with dark hair and a serious expression. "What are you doing in my room?" he demanded. I felt a surge of fear. "This is my room," I said. "I checked in earlier, but now my stuff is gone and your stuff is here." He frowned and stepped closer. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been here all day. You need to leave." I held up my hands. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I just want to find my things and figure out what's going on. He stared at me for a moment, then nodded. Fine. Let's go to the front desk and sort this out. We went down together, but the clerk gave us the same story. There was no record of me ever checking in, and room 202 was registered to Robert Klein. The man, who apparently was Robert, looked at me with suspicion. You should leave, he said. I don't know what your game is, but I'm not interested. I had no choice. I left the motel, feeling more confused and scared than ever. I drove to another motel a few miles away and checked in there. As I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. It was like someone was trying to erase my presence, to make it seem like I had never been there. The next morning, I went back to the first motel. The clerk from last night wasn't there, replaced by a younger woman with a friendly smile. Hi, how can I help you? She asked. I explained the situation, hoping for some clarity. She typed into the computer and frowned. I don't have a Max Turner in the system, but I do see a Robert Klein in room 202. I felt a chill run down my spine. Can you tell me who checked in yesterday around 6 p.m.? She nodded and checked. According to this, Robert Klein checked in at 5:45 p.m. I felt a wave of frustration. That's not possible. I checked in at 6, and my stuff was in the room. She looked at me with concern. I'm sorry, sir. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe you should contact the police. I left the motel, my mind racing. I decided to go to the police station and report what happened. The officer listened to my story, but he seemed skeptical. Are you sure you didn't just go to the wrong motel? He asked. I shook my head. No, I'm sure. Something weird is going on. He took my statement but didn't seem very interested. I left the station feeling frustrated and scared. I drove around for a while, trying to make sense of everything. Then, I remembered the key card. I pulled it out of my pocket and examined it. There was a number on the back. I called it, hoping for some answers. A man answered. Hello? Hi, I found this key card, and I think it belongs to you, I said. There was a pause. Where did you find it? At the motel, I said. I checked into room 202, but my stuff disappeared, and your stuff was there instead. The man sighed. Look, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never stayed at that motel. I felt a wave of frustration. Then how did I end up with your key card? He hung up, leaving me more confused than ever. I decided to go back to the motel one last time. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw Robert Klein loading his car. He glanced at me and quickly looked away. I got out of my car and approached him. What's going on? I demanded. Why did my stuff disappear? He looked nervous. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, avoiding eye contact. I grabbed his arm. Tell me the truth. He pulled away. Leave me alone, he said, getting into his car and driving off. I stood there, feeling helpless and scared. I didn't know what to do. It was like someone was trying to erase me, to make it seem like I never existed. I went back to my car and sat there for a while, trying to calm down. Then, I had an idea. I drove to the nearest library and used their computer to search for any information about the motel and Robert Klein. I found nothing. It was like they didn't exist. I felt a sense of dread. I knew I couldn't stay in one place for too long. Someone was after me, and I didn't know why. I checked into another motel under a different name and hoped for the best. I decided to stay at the rundown motel on the edge of town for a few nights while covering a story on local crime. The place was cheap and unremarkable, exactly what I needed for a few days of reporting. It was clear from the start that the motel was worn out, flickering lights, peeling paint, and a distinct musty smell. But it was close to where I needed to be, so I didn't think much of it. The first night was uneventful. I spent most of it going through my notes and organizing interviews. By the second night, though, things started to get strange. I was working late, typing away on my laptop when I heard voices from the adjacent room. It wasn't unusual for a place like this, but the low, tense tone of the conversation caught my attention. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just another argument or some loud guests. But then I heard something that made me sit up. There was mention of a shipment and pickup. The words sounded urgent, almost like a deal was about to go down. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I peered through the peephole but saw nothing. I then crept to the window and looked outside. I saw a couple of unmarked cars parked nearby, and several people moving in and out of the room next to mine. I couldn't see much more, so I decided to step outside and investigate from a safer distance. As I walked toward the cars, I saw a man in a suit talking to two other men who looked out of place in the neighborhood. My instincts told me something was off, but I tried to stay calm and blend into the background. Just then, I saw a couple of large duffel bags being unloaded from one of the cars. I was about to turn back when I noticed a figure watching me from the corner of the building. It was a tall man in a dark coat. I froze. He looked right at me and then nodded towards the door of the room next to mine. I knew I had been spotted. My heart raced as I turned to head back to my room, but the man was already moving toward me. I made it back to my room and locked the door, trying to keep my breathing steady. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, but as I was about to speak, a loud knock came from the door. I jumped and looked through the peephole. It was the man from outside, looking directly at me. Panic set in. I hung up the phone and backed away from the door. The knock turned into banging, and I heard muffled voices demanding I open up. I knew they were after me now. I grabbed my laptop and phone and tried to find another exit, but the only other door led to a stairwell that might be a trap. I listened carefully and heard sirens approaching. The noise outside escalated as police cars arrived and officers began shouting. It sounded like a full-scale operation was unfolding. I realized the man from earlier must have been part of the criminal operation and that the whole scene was much bigger than I had thought. The banging at my door stopped. I peeked through the peephole again and saw that the man was gone. I quickly made my way to the back exit, which was a small, poorly lit alley. I could see officers and criminals in a standoff from a distance. I needed to get out of there before things got even worse. I darted down the alley, staying close to the walls, and made my way to a nearby street where I could call for a ride. My hands were shaking as I waited for the car to arrive. When it finally did, I got in and directed the driver to a safer part of town. Once I was in a safer place, I reached out to my editor and briefed them on everything that happened. The situation was chaotic, but it was clear I had narrowly avoided a dangerous encounter. The police later confirmed that they had arrested several people involved in the operation, and it was a major bust.